two previous presenters, Sue and Matthieu. So thanks again for presenting. I really enjoyed the presentations. While the topic were completely different, I think there are many things that were similar. Using reverse engineering and technical analysis to understand how attackers or malicious actors are behaving, how they're evolving over time. I think it was also interesting to note that it is likely that both actors are operating from the same region of the world, while at the same time the motivations are different. So I think this was really good. The first question I have for you, actually we have a couple questions from the audience already. Thank you. If you have more, we will have microphones, you can ask them, or you can ask them on Silo as well. So that's it. Please, please send your questions if you have them. But before that, I'll start with two of my own questions, just to warm you up and get you accustomed to the microphones. So my first question, and I'll start with you, Sue. If you had unlimited resources and you had to do that research again, unlimited resources in the sense of both money, but also reverse engineers, contacts in the government, is there anything you do different, or you wish you had the resources to do something more?
Good question. So the thing with a lot of e-crime malwares that I track at work, it's very unlike APT. It's a lot more widespread. You see a lot of them. And it's also something I touched on the slide briefly, that what a lot of these malware use a beaconing style communication. So that makes it a lot more harder to pull down payloads that they're trying to spread. So if money wasn't an issue, it would be actually quite fun to try and infect as many machines as we can and track all these different affiliates and what payloads they choose to distribute. Because I think that's one thing that's missing in a lot of our industry. So we do track some affiliates, but not all of them. It's impossible. You can emulate up to a certain point, but then it comes to a point where these affiliates are installing tooling on the victim machine that requires hands-on keyboard activity. So at that point, emulation is useless, and you do need a machine. And if they don't find anything interesting on a machine, they're less likely to load anything. So yeah, money not an issue. Infect as many computers out there.
That's a really good answer. What about you, Matthieu?
Yeah, I think that your idea about having full environment to see how actors are behaving will be a pretty good idea. Even for APTs, sometimes I would like to have that big Windows domain, like a fake one with a machine with interesting documents, etc., just to see what they are doing. This is a good point. And specifically for my research, I didn't have much time to focus on the first part, the traffic direction system. If I had more resources, I will definitely look at that to try to find out how these threat actors, where they are selling their services, exactly what other threat actors are using it, and trying to separate the chain among the different threat actors. I think that's what's missing in the research.
Cool, thanks. And by the way, I didn't want to highlight anything that was missing, just more. We always have limited resources and limited time, so cool. One thing that I'm noticing in different research teams looking at cybercrime is that there is lots of similarities with tracking APT actors, but sometimes there are some things that are harder, in my opinion. One of them is how we organize multiple researchers tracking cybercrime. In APT, I think many research teams will split between Russian actors, Iranian actors, Chinese actors, maybe North Korea. How do you think teams doing cybercrime research should be structured, or do you have good experience in your own organizations that you'd like to share?
I guess I'll go with that since it's cybercrime. That's a good point. That's true. I mean, I believe CrowdStrike has a similar structure like that, where APT focus is by country and e-crime is, everything. You have, in my case, I work on certain families, and there's some other analysts, they work on it by family basis. But we are starting to notice things like tooling that is shared across these groups. And then this does make it a lot more harder. I mean, as far as it's concerned, I mean, we could place most of these malware groups under, say, one country in particular, because that's where they tend to arrive. But of course, you do see malware coming from other country. I don't think there's any clear solution, but the key thing is to distinguish these toolings as much as possible, and then you have, so from a low-level perspective, and then from a high-level perspective, you have threat intelligence analysts come into play and try and make that connection with how this tooling is used across groups. So I don't think settling with countries is enough, because it's clearly not targeted, and this is a whole different financial sort of ball game here.
Yeah, I think the problem with cybercrime is that it's a whole ecosystem, so you cannot really, you can make clusters, but everything is connected, so you cannot like work on something and it's not separate from everything. For APTs, for example, you can separate by countries, because APTs, they don't collaborate with each other. Like if you track Russian APTs, they will never collaborate with Chinese APTs or North Korean actors. Or if you work on some APT, you can just work on that, and it has no relation with anything else. So it's quite easy to separate the job. Even like we are not how we are organized. Like in ESET is we don't separate by countries. Like for example, I work mostly on Russian APTs, but also on Chinese APTs, and same for other people. But we tend to track like different groups, and one people is responsible for one group, and it's very rare that we have to someone has to collaborate with another researcher because groups are sharing something, except for Chinese APTs, which is a big mess, but yeah, it's really easier to cluster things. Like for example, when I did the asylum ambuscade research, it was really hard to understand like the infection chain and the traffic direction system and all this stuff, because there are so many different threat actors using like same TDS, so it gets messy quite easy.
That's actually a good point that you brought up, about the tooling, because it reminds me of the Conti leaks, and not just the Conti leaks, just like a Bazaar loader. So when Bazaar loader was using this Bazaar call type campaigns, a lot of these call centers were opened in India. But we know that Bazaar loader, none of those developers are from India, and based off what we've seen in the Conti leaks. So clearly there's a lot of international collaboration here, and it's a lot more, it's a lot more organized than we thought, before. Another good example I have with eCrime is, so for BotBot, or publicly it's called ICE-ID, they use this hidden VNC tool. Matthieu talked about like hidden VNCs. So they've been using this tool since 2019, but now we're seeing that same tool being distributed by Bumblebee. We even see like a Catbot using a similar tool, and it's a bit, it was a bit like curious. It's like, is this just another group building this tool? Like, where are they getting their hands on this tool from? So clearly there's a lot of organization happening here, something that we're not privy to.
Thanks. I would like to ask you, Lily, you had a question, and if that's okay with you, I'd like you to ask it live, because I think you will deliver it better than myself.
Oh. Hi, Sue. So a question in regards to Bumblebee. So with the API unhooking module in that particular malware, when it detects that an API is hooked in memory, so it overwrites that with the bytes on disk. And my question is, what happens if there's a memory pointer at the beginning of that particular API on disk and, for example, in memory? would it just write the raw bytes from disk and that memory pointer would be invalid and potentially cause any type of crash, do you figure? What are your thoughts there?
Cool, thanks Lily for the question. So this was, I think it was a slide I just quickly went by. It was a slide that talked about the libsplice, the splicing library that does the unhooking. So essentially when it's trying to remove any hooks on APIs, it's copying over bytes from the instructions in its physical file. So Lily pointed out the fact that, you might have instructions in memory where it's referencing addresses, and that could be a potential problem because does this malware take care of rebasing those addresses? Long story short, no, they don't. They don't even do anything different. They just completely use this library as is. Thing about this library, it is almost a decade old, so it's not something new and not something that was aware of rebasing. So they just copied this. But for some reason, it seems to work. I was able to create a mock server and have it, and like feed it and the payload just to see if it would run like calc.exe, and it ran. There was no problem. So maybe they tested it, maybe not. There's no clear idea why, but it seems to work. But I believe also Lily's done research where we have seen other families now starting to look and implement those checks for rebasing. So a lot of these groups are probably becoming aware of the faults behind some of these hooking libraries. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again for your question. Is there any other question in the audience? We are now ready to take some questions. Yes, please go ahead, and if that's okay with you, I'll try to rephrase your question for the ones listening online. So please step in and correct me if I didn't understand your question properly. The question is, in Bumblebee, why did the developers choose RC4 instead of something maybe more efficient or more modern like RC5 or Doublefish?
Good question. It's not clear why they've introduced RC4, and RC4 is it's like this go-to thing with a lot of e-crime malwares. A lot of them just use RC4. But there is also a bit of a hidden meaning behind it, and not something I've talked about. So with Bumblebee, a lot of the samples, based on which affiliates is using the malware, each affiliate has their own RC4 key. And so even though it's communicating with the server, you need to make sure you're communicating with the server that can decrypt messages with that proper key. So in a way, it wasn't only just encrypting traffic, it was also used to track communication for certain affiliates. So you couldn't just use any, Bumblebee malware and just take the C2s from that malware and just communicate with it. If you don't know the RC4 key that's associated with the C2, it makes it harder to see what the response is. So it's, in their way, slightly tricky, unless you have the malware, you can't use it. But, I mean, yeah, they could have carried it forward, but they clearly didn't bother. Yeah.
Thanks for your answer.
Maybe we can explain why threat actors like using RC4. So I don't really know about RC5 and RC6, but for RC4 there is no constant. So if you compare to AES, for example, in RC4 there is no constant, so it's harder to detect RC4 with a byte patterns. You'll need to check the decompiler who have a signature on some disassembly graph. So that's why threat actors are using RC4. It's just hard to make a signature on it.
Thanks for this explanation. I'll go with one question we had online for you, Matthieu, which was, can you elaborate a bit on the what does it mean that there was a watermark for the CrowdStrike sample that you described?
So the watermark is a number that is linked to the license linked to the CrowdStrike builder. The problem is that first it's quite easy to change. If I remember correctly, it's just a number in a text file in the root directory of like the CrowdStrike instance. But generally, threat actors don't care about changing it. So it can still be useful to cluster different CrowdStrike beacons. You extract the config and then you cluster by watermark. The second problem is that there are a lot of CrowdStrike builders that have been leaked online. So you can find like CrowdStrike builder of like previous versions, and a lot of threat actors are reusing those leaked builders, and that's why they end up with the same watermark at the end.
Thanks. I'll continue with questions online. I like that everyone is able to vote and upvote them, so it helps me prioritize. The next one I think is for you, Sue. And the question is, could you abuse the beaconing system in Bumblebee to affect the attacker in order to infect the attacker in order to unmask their identity? You seem to be expecting that question. I like it.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have any good answer because, part of my work is we do not attack back. So it may be possible, but it's not something, we are allowed to pursue or look forward. And so I just really only monitor traffic. And that's it. That's all I can answer to it.
Awesome. I think the next one is for you, Matthieu. Did you need to enable macros in Word and Excel and Microsoft Publisher files in order to get a successful infection?
Probably yes, but to be honest, I just extracted the macro and didn't try to run the document. But if it was downloaded from the internet, I think for few years now. So before. Before July 2022, you had some message and you can just click to enable macro. But now it's just not possible to run macro from the internet if you have like up-to-date version of Microsoft Office.
Thank you. Next one is crypto still very in fashion in the crime world, or has hype died down like in the mainstream? And if so, which cryptocurrency? I guess cryptocurrency in this case. So maybe I'll start with you, Matthieu, because I think you did mention that some of the targets for your for the group you're tracking were looking at cryptocurrency.
Yes. So we noticed that attackers, when they were collecting, like for example, browsing histories or like doing like keylogging, they were very interested in taking credentials to log in popular cryptocurrency exchange, for example. So we haven't observed them really stealing those cryptocurrencies. But I guess if they are collecting wallet addresses, logging password for crypto exchange, it's just not to look at the number. And what was the original question? Not sure I answered the question.
I think you did answer the question. Maybe the other part was, is there anything you can share about which crypto exchanges or which currencies were mostly targeted?
Mostly Bitcoin, if I remember correctly, and like the exchanges, it was very random, so it mostly depends on what exchange the victim was using.
Okay.
I could expand on that. So it's not with Bumblebee or anything. This is actually, because I also been tracking some Mac OS malware, a lot of stealers. So lately we've been seeing, it's kind of an interesting question, because we've been seeing a lot of stealers that target gamers and like social engineer gamers through Twitter, and to get them to install stealers on their machine, which end of the day just steals wallets and an extensive list of wallets. And it's all related to the metaverse, because some of these games, they use cryptocurrency exchanges for trading and stuff. So they look at like Binance, Bitcoin. There was a list, and I don't know the entire list off my head, but I think it's more common in the gaming world. Yeah, for sure.
Great, thanks for the additional context. This is really appreciated. The next question is something we've already touched on, but I will go through it again, and then please feel free to chime in if there's something else you'd like to add. How different is it in studying geopolitically motivated malware attacks versus the ones created by criminals? Is there a significant difference or pretty much the same? I'll start by summarizing what I remember from what we've discussed so far. I think we've discussed that state-sponsored attackers are going to be mostly not sharing their tools or techniques. They have their own things, and the Chinese and the Russians rarely exchange tools. While for the cybercrime, we see a lot more of exchange and common pieces being used. Anything else that you see that kind of stands out as geopolitical versus criminal malware?
I can start if you want. Maybe how malware are developed or protected. Like generally, crimeware malware are very well protected. There are like big packers which are very annoying to reverse. They do a lot of checks like to see if they are running in some virtual machine or sandbox or stuff like that. On the contrary, APT malware generally they are not packed. Very little obfuscated. Like from time to time, like strings are obfuscated, but that's pretty much it. So of course, from time to time, there is some very big changes that are very hard to understand, but generally, like it's, I'd say, maybe not easier to reverse because the malware are very big, like a lot of functionalities are generally in C++, like network communication can be quite hard to understand, but they are rarely use packer because they want to stay under the radar and looks like any other file on the system. When you have some pack sample, it's start to be suspicious.
I guess what I could add to it is e-crime these days, they are a lot more ransomware focused. I mean, that's the easy way to make money. It's and of course, if it's targeting gamers, it's stealing cryptocurrency. But like gone are the days you see banking trojans, and most APTs don't. I could be wrong. They may be doing ransomware or not, but that's what's clearly defining and what what defines e-crime and APT. And also I find that e-crime, they tend to focus a lot more on EDR evasion because they are targeting companies, and companies most likely have some EDR solution, and they just want to bypass that. And especially with ransomware, you're seeing a trend with the vulnerable drivers, so the BYOVD. And so, they clearly, they want to prevent EDRs from seeing that they're encrypting files, so vulnerable drivers is the way to go, apparently, these days. So yeah, I guess hope that answers the question.
I think it does. Thank you. I'll start with Matthieu for the next one. Have you seen the situation in Ukraine generally increase malware threat activity? And what do you think those people working on malware will do if the war ends?
So we did see an increase of malware attacks in Ukraine, but those are mostly state-sponsored attacks. So the people developing those malware were most probably working for the same organization before the war and will continue to work for the same organization after the war. So not sure if it will change anything. And we did see like some increase in the context of the war, but it's not like crazy. And in the last few months, it's really more quiet than it was 1 year ago.
Anything to add, Sue?
No, I think Matthieu answered it well.
Perfect. The next question is also a bit APT oriented. Have you been involved in nation-state APT identification for diplomatic allegations, for example, blaming Russian FSB for attacks?
So from time to time, we will say that the group is most likely like Russia aligned or China aligned, but we never go as far as naming the entity of the person who is behind it. It's quite easy to make mistakes, and it's more a political job to do that.
Right.
I agree. I mean, yes.
Cool. And we have time for one last question. It is also a bit politically oriented. How much work is going on with groups blaming each other? For example, Anonymous Sudan recently was discovered to be actually tied to Russian APT. Are there other examples? I can start because I see you looking at the sky. I think I do remember one case of another Russian operation at the beginning of the war with Ukraine, where they changed some of the metadata in some pictures to make it look like it was coming from Poland, but it was very amateurish and not super convincing. So I think false flag operations are not uncommon, but to say if they are increasing or if there are recent examples, I would need to ask our experts.
In e-crime, well, with group blaming, you normally see a lot of, within the group, a lot of them, sometimes there can be tensions. I think that was quite clear with Conti leaks, when something political comes up, and but of course it was a Ukrainian researcher that released the logs, but you don't see it too much. You mostly see it maybe among ransomware groups, like especially if there was a ransomware that targeted a hospital, and then they immediately try to post on like the data leak site that it's not them, it's someone else. And so it's oftentimes that case because they do not want to be liable and they are actually worried. But otherwise, like it's hard to, we haven't seen it elsewhere like in e-crime. About APT, I'm not sure. Maybe there's a lot more of that happening in that end.
I don't think there are a lot of them. Another example was the one in Korea during the Winter Olympics. I don't remember exactly the details, but there was something with rich headers from like North Korean group, and actually it was like Sednit was behind like the attack, like a Russia-aligned group. It's a bit old, so I don't remember exactly the details, but actually like this group Sednit make it look like it was some like North Korean aligned group that was behind the attack. But like it's not very common, or it's too good and we don't realize it, but I don't know.
Okay, so something that came up in my mind. So you don't see this like immediately in campaigns, but you do see it in forums. You see a lot of sometimes arguments, sometimes when an author, like some group has developed a malware and they're selling it to affiliates, the affiliates can sometimes backstab or do something that they're not meant to do. There's always rules among them that they allow affiliates to do, not do. So that is actually quite common in e-crime. And so especially, again, with ransomware, they try to tell affiliates that because of you, you're targeting hospitals, you're no longer part of the program. So that's pretty common. Or sometimes you have affiliates that will buy a test build, but then end up using it their own way, and that, quite frankly upsets the developer, and then they just release it, or they go into cahoots with someone else. But yeah, so it's as long as there's money, there's always something to be upset about.
These are really good examples. Thank you. And we are at time, so thank you very much for your presentations, for everything you've shared, and then for joining this panel. It's great having this discussion with you, and thanks to all of you for your questions.